They say the moment that changes your life forever always comes when you least expect it. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday evening in October, standing in the kitchen of what I thought was our dream home, listening to my husband tell me exactly how worthless I was. "Go ahead, leave," Marcus said, not even looking up from his phone as he poured himself a scotch. His voice was casual, almost amused, like he was discussing the weather rather than the end of our 10-year marriage. "I give you a week before you come crawling back, begging me to take you in. You have nothing without me, Sarah. Absolutely nothing." The smirk on his face when he finally looked at me was what did it. Not anger, not even contempt, just pure amusement at what he clearly thought was an empty threat. He actually found the idea of me leaving funny. I'd spent the entire day working up the courage to confront him about what I'd discovered. The charges on our credit cards for hotels I'd never stayed in. The perfume I'd found in his car that definitely wasn't mine. The way he'd been coming home later and later, always with excuses that sounded just a little too rehearsed. I thought I'd prepared myself for denial, maybe even anger. I never expected indifference. "I know about her, Marcus," I said quietly. "I know about Brittany." He didn't even have the decency to look surprised. Instead, he laughed. Actually laughed. "Of course you do. I stopped being careful weeks ago. Why bother hiding something from someone who's too stupid to do anything about it?" The words hit me like physical blows. This was the man who had sworn to love me forever. The man who had promised to be my partner, my protector, my best friend. And he was standing in our kitchen, calling me stupid for not wanting to know he was cheating on me. "I want a divorce," I said, and I was proud that my voice didn't shake. "Then file for one." He shrugged, taking a sip of his scotch. "But let me paint a picture of what your life is going to look like. You don't have a job. You don't have any income. You don't even have your own credit card anymore. Remember? We consolidated everything under my name to simplify our finances." He used air quotes, mocking my trust in him. "You'll be living in some studio apartment, working some minimum wage job, wondering why you threw away the comfortable life I gave you." He walked closer to me, and I could smell the expensive cologne he wore, the same cologne I used to love. Now it just smelled like lies. "1 week, Sarah. That's all you'll last out there on your own. Then you'll come back here apologizing, promising to be more understanding about my needs. And maybe, if I'm feeling generous, I'll consider taking you back. But things will be different. You'll know your place." That's when I saw them. The divorce papers sitting on his desk in the study, visible through the open door. He'd already had them drawn up. This whole conversation wasn't spontaneous. He'd been planning it, rehearsing it, setting up this exact scenario where he could watch me break down and beg. But I didn't break down. Instead, something inside me went very still and very cold. "You're right," I said calmly. "Things will be different." The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., not with tears, but with absolute clarity. Marcus was still asleep, probably dreaming about his victory speech from the night before. He had no idea that the woman lying next to him wasn't the same person who'd gone to bed. See, Marcus had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated me so completely, so thoroughly, that he'd never bothered to check if the story he told himself about me was actually true. The truth was much more interesting than his fiction. 10 years ago, when we met, I was a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. I was 26 years old and pulling down a 6-figure salary, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions. I was good at my job, really good. The kind of good that gets you noticed by senior partners and headhunted by competitors. Marcus was a charismatic entrepreneur with a tech startup that showed promise. We met at a networking event, and he pursued me with the kind of intensity that felt romantic at the time. Flowers delivered to my office. Surprise dinners at restaurants I'd mentioned wanting to try. Long conversations about our dreams and ambitions. "You're the smartest woman I've ever met," he told me on our 3rd date. "The way your mind works, the way you see patterns in numbers that other people miss, it's incredible." 6 months later, we were engaged. A year after that, we were married in a ceremony that cost more than my parents' house. Everything seemed perfect. The shift happened gradually. So gradually that I didn't notice until it was almost complete. First, it was suggestions that I might want to work fewer hours, that my job was stressing me out too much. Then it was gentle pressure about starting a family, about how we could afford for me to stay home. Then it was more direct statements about how my career was getting in the way of our marriage. "I make more than enough for both of us," Marcus would say. "Why are you killing yourself at that job when you don't need to? Stay home. Focus on making our house a home. Support my career instead of competing with it." And like an idiot, I'd agreed. Or at least that's what Marcus thought. The truth was very different. The truth was that I'd seen this pattern before, in my own mother's life. She'd given up her career for my father, trusted him to handle the finances, and ended up completely dependent on him. When he left her for a younger woman 20 years later, she'd had nothing. No recent work history, no savings in her own name, no way to support herself beyond his grudging alimony payments. I'd sworn I would never be in that position. Ever. So yes, I'd quit my job at Morrison & Associates. I'd made a big show of turning in my resignation, of telling everyone I was going to focus on my marriage and my home. Marcus had been so pleased with himself, so satisfied that he'd convinced me to give up my independence. What he didn't know was that I'd quit Morrison 2 weeks before he asked me to. But not to stay home. I'd quit because I'd been offered a partnership at a smaller but more prestigious firm, Caldwell Strategic Investments. And when I say partnership, I don't mean junior partner. I mean founding partner. 3 colleagues and I had decided to start our own firm, focusing on long-term strategic investments for high-net-worth clients. It was risky, sure, but we all had the experience, the connections, and the capital to make it work. My share of the initial investment was $2 million. Money I'd saved over 5 years of working 80-hour weeks. Marcus never knew about that money. It was in accounts I'd opened before we were married, and I'd kept them separate on the advice of my lawyer. California is a community property state, but assets held before marriage and kept separate remain separate property. I've been very careful about that. So while Marcus thought I was at home organizing closets and planning dinner parties, I was actually working, just remotely, under a different name. Sarah Chin was a stay-at-home wife, but S.C. Caldwell was a founding partner of a multimillion-dollar investment firm. I'd kept my maiden name professionally, never mentioned my marriage in business contexts, and been very careful about keeping those 2 lives completely separate. For 8 years, I'd been living this double life, going to the office when Marcus thought I was having lunch with friends, taking business calls when he thought I was chatting with my mother, building an investment portfolio that had grown to $12 million while he thought I was financially dependent on him. The irony was almost funny. While Marcus was bragging to his friends about supporting his wife, I was actually making more money than he was. While he was moving our joint savings into accounts I supposedly couldn't access, I was watching my own investments grow. While he was planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing, I was already financially independent. But I'd never told him. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd wanted to see who he really was. And now I knew. That morning, while Marcus slept, I made 3 phone calls. First, to my lawyer, Rebecca Martinez, who'd been my college roommate before she became one of the top divorce attorneys in the state. Second, to my business partner, David Chin, who was also one of the best forensic accountants in the country. Third, to my bank to move some pieces into position. By the time Marcus woke up at 9, showered, and came down for breakfast, everything was already in motion. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, pouring him coffee. "Sleep well." He looked at me with barely concealed contempt. "Are you still here? I thought you'd be at your mother's by now, crying about how mean I was." "Actually, I've been thinking about what you said last night. You were right about a lot of things." His expression shifted to satisfaction. He thought I was about to apologize, to beg for another chance. "I'm glad you're finally seeing sense." "Oh, I am. I'm seeing things very clearly now. Which is why I need you to sign these papers." I slid a folder across the breakfast table. He opened it, expecting to see maybe a credit card application or some household paperwork. Instead, his face went white. "What is this?" "Those are eviction papers. This house is actually in my name." I bought it 6 months before we got married. But I let you think it was ours because I didn't want to hurt your pride. But since we're being honest now about our feelings, I'm exercising my right as the sole owner to ask you to leave." His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You can't do this. I already have. You'll also notice that our joint accounts have been frozen pending a full audit. I have reason to believe you've been moving marital funds without my knowledge, which is illegal. My attorney will be filing for divorce this afternoon, and trust me, Marcus, you're going to want to cooperate." "You don't have an attorney. You don't have anything." I smiled, the same kind of smile he'd given me last night. "You know what's funny? You spent so long telling yourself that story about me being helpless and dependent that you never bothered to check if it was true. I have an attorney. A good one. I also have a forensic accountant going through our finances right now. And Marcus, sweetheart, you're in so much trouble." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the $5 million you've embezzled from our joint accounts over the past 2 years. I'm talking about the credit cards you opened in my name without my permission. I'm talking about the loans you took out using my credit score, which, by the way, is much better than yours. All of which is fraud. Criminal fraud." The color had completely drained from his face now. "You can't prove any of that. I can prove all of it. I've been documenting everything for 6 months. Ever since I started suspecting you were cheating, I hired a forensic accountant to look into our finances. You know what he found? That your company is bankrupt. That you've been using marital funds to cover business losses. That you're approximately $30 million in debt to various creditors who are all going to come calling very soon." Marcus sat down heavily in his chair. How did I figure it out? I'm a financial analyst, Marcus. Numbers are literally what I do. Or did you forget that I had a career before you convinced me to give it up? You don't have a career anymore. You've been out of the workforce for 8 years. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when I got to see his face as his entire reality collapsed. Actually, I never left the workforce. I've been working this entire time. I'm a founding partner at Caldwell Strategic Investments. We manage over $500 million in assets. My personal portfolio is worth approximately $12 million. I make about $2 million a year, which is considerably more than you make. Or made, I guess, since your company is currently in bankruptcy proceedings. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. I watched Marcus's brain trying to process information that didn't fit into his worldview. His wife, the woman he'd been calling stupid and helpless, was actually wealthier than he was. Had been, the entire time he was cheating on her and planning to leave her with nothing. "That's impossible," he finally whispered. "No, it's actually very possible. It just required me to be smarter than you, which, as it turns out, wasn't very difficult. But you've been home every day. You've cooked dinner, organized the house. I work remotely, Marcus. It's called technology. The same technology you supposedly understand so well from your tech company. I take calls from my home office. I have meetings over video. I go into the physical office twice a week while you think I'm having lunch with friends. It's amazing what you can accomplish when your husband is so self-absorbed that he doesn't ask questions." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. You can't just kick me out of my own house. It's not your house. It never was. And yes, I can. You have until 5 p.m. to pack your things and leave, or I'll have the police escort you out. And before you think about causing a scene, remember that I have evidence of multiple felonies. Embezzlement, fraud, identity theft. I can make this a civil divorce or a criminal case. Your choice." For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked genuinely afraid. "Sarah, wait. We can talk about this. I made mistakes, okay? But we can work through this. We've been together for 10 years. 10 years of you systematically undermining my confidence, isolating me from my friends, and stealing my money. 10 years of you cheating on me while calling me paranoid for asking questions. 10 years of you planning to discard me the moment I was no longer useful. No, Marcus, we're done talking. You gave me a week without you. I'm giving you a lifetime." He tried anger next. "You'll never get away with this. I'll fight you on everything. I'll drag this out for years. You'll what? Hire a lawyer with what money? Your accounts are frozen. Remember? And once word gets out that your company is bankrupt and you're facing fraud charges, good luck finding anyone willing to take your case. Meanwhile, I have one of the best divorce attorneys in the state, unlimited resources, and documentation of every terrible thing you've done. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. 5 p.m., Marcus. Don't be late. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings, financial audits, and the systematic dismantling of the life Marcus thought he'd built. My attorney, Rebecca, moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for this case her entire career. I have to tell you, she said during one of our strategy meetings, in 15 years of practice, I've never seen someone prepare for a divorce this thoroughly. You've documented everything. I learned from my mother's mistakes. She trusted and it destroyed her. I verified and it saved me. The forensic audit David conducted revealed even more than I'd suspected. Marcus hadn't just been embezzling from our joint accounts. He'd also been running his company into the ground through a combination of bad decisions and outright theft. He'd been paying himself an executive salary while the company couldn't make payroll. He'd been using company funds for personal expenses. He'd been lying to investors about the company's financial health. But the most damning discovery was about Brittany. Brittany Chun was 26 years old, which made her 16 years younger than Marcus and 10 years younger than me. She called herself a business consultant, but her real profession seemed to be serial gold digger. David's investigation found that she'd been involved with at least 3 wealthy men in the past 5 years, each relationship ending with a substantial financial settlement. Her pattern was consistent. Target a wealthy married man. Seduce him. Convince him his wife was holding him back. Push him toward divorce. Extract as much money as possible. Move on to the next target. Marcus was just her latest mark. And based on the text messages David recovered, she'd been playing him like a violin. Your wife is such a drag, she texted him 6 months ago. When are you finally going to leave her? I'm not getting any younger, and I didn't start this relationship to be the side chick forever. Marcus's response made my stomach turn. Soon, baby. Promise. I'm just getting our finances arranged so she can't take everything in the divorce. She's too stupid to know what I'm doing. Give me a few more months. You better hurry, Brittany had replied. I've been offered a partnership with another firm, if you know what I mean. If you can't commit to me, I'll have to explore other options. The manipulation was textbook. Create urgency. Threaten to leave. Make the Mark feel like he needed to act fast or lose his chance. And Marcus, being Marcus, had fallen for it completely. But the texts got worse. They'd discussed their plans for after the divorce in detail that was both illuminating and infuriating. Once you're free of that deadweight, Brittany had written, we can finally live the life we deserve. Penthouse in Manhattan, villa in the south of France, yacht in the Caribbean. You'll take your company public, and we'll be worth hundreds of millions. What Marcus hadn't told Brittany was that his company was worthless. That far from going public, it was headed for bankruptcy. That the wealth she thought she was marrying into didn't exist anymore. He'd been lying to her the same way he'd been lying to me. The difference was, I had the intelligence to figure it out. Brittany was about to get a very rude awakening. The divorce papers were filed on a Friday morning. Marcus was served at his office, in front of his entire board of directors, who were already suspicious about the company's finances. The petition included every detail of his fraud, his affair, and his plans to defraud me. According to my sources, he'd gone completely white when the process server handed him the documents. He'd tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, but the board immediately called an emergency meeting. By close of business that day, Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His phone calls to me started that evening and didn't stop for 3 days. I ignored everyone. Finally, he showed up at the house, my house, banging on the door and demanding to be let in. Sarah, open this door. We need to talk about this. I watched him through the security camera. This man who had promised to love and cherish me, now desperate and disheveled because his carefully laid plans had imploded. I picked up my phone and called the police. There's someone trespassing on my property and refusing to leave. Marcus was escorted off the premises by two very patient officers who warned him that if he came back, he'd be arrested. The next approach came from his lawyer, a man named Gerald Stevens who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. He called Rebecca with a settlement offer that was almost insulting in its presumption. Mr. Lopez is willing to offer Mrs. Lopez $50,000 and forgiveness of her portion of his business debts if she'll agree to an uncontested divorce. Rebecca's laughter was genuinely delighted. Tell Mr. Lopez that my client counters with the following. He will pay $8 million in restitution for the funds he embezzled, plus $3 million in damages, plus all legal fees, or we will pursue criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. He has 48 hours to respond. Gerald called back in 30 minutes. Mrs. Martinez, I think there's been some misunderstanding about the financial situation here. No misunderstanding, Rebecca replied crisply. We have documentation of every fraudulent transaction. We have evidence of systematic embezzlement. We have recordings of Mr. Lopez planning to defraud his wife. Your client is looking at multiple felonies. This is actually a very generous offer considering what we could do to him. My client doesn't have $8 million. Then he should start figuring out where to get it. Because the alternative is prison, and I don't think Mr. Lopez would do well in prison. While lawyers negotiated, David's forensic audit was revealing even more interesting information. The deeper he dug into Marcus's finances, the worse it got. Sarah, he told me during one of our updates, your husband isn't just broke, he's spectacularly broke. He owes money to banks, private lenders, investors, and the IRS. If we laid out all his debts, they'd total about $30 million. $30 million? How is that possible? He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for at least 3 years, taking loans to cover previous loans, using investor money to pay creditors. It's a house of cards, and it's all coming down now. What about the company? The company is done. They'll file for bankruptcy within the month. The board is probably going to sue him personally for fraud. His investors are definitely going to sue him, and the IRS is going to want their money regardless of what else happens. I should have felt sorry for him. 10 years of marriage should have counted for something. But all I could think about was his smirk when he told me I'd come crawling back. His absolute certainty that I was nothing without him. What about Brittany? I asked. Does she know how broke he is? David grinned. Based on the surveillance, I'd say she's figuring it out. She hasn't returned his calls in 3 days. According to her social media, she's currently in Monaco with a much older gentleman who appears to be an oil executive. So Brittany had moved on already, leaving Marcus to face the consequences of their schemes alone. I couldn't say I was surprised. Women like Brittany didn't stick around when the money dried up. The deposition was scheduled for 3 weeks after I filed for divorce. This was where both sides would present their evidence and testimony before trial. Rebecca had prepared me thoroughly, but I wasn't nervous. I had the truth on my side, and the truth was devastating. Marcus arrived at the deposition looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. His expensive suit hung a little loose, like he'd lost weight. His face was drawn, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For just a moment, I remembered the man I'd fallen in love with, before success and arrogance had turned him into someone I didn't recognize. Then he saw me and his expression hardened into anger, and I remembered exactly why I was doing this. All right, Rebecca began once we were all seated in the conference room. Let's start with your testimony, Mr. Lopez. Please describe the state of your marriage to my client. Marcus had clearly been coached by his lawyer. His voice was measured, his words careful. My marriage to Sarah had been deteriorating for several years. We'd grown apart. We wanted different things. The divorce was unfortunate but necessary. Interesting, Rebecca said mildly, because according to these text messages between you and Miss Brittany Chun, you described your wife as, and I quote, too stupid to know what I'm doing. Does that sound like someone who'd simply grown apart from their spouse? Or someone who was actively planning to defraud them? Marcus's lawyer, Gerald, objected immediately. Those texts were taken out of context. Were they? Rebecca slid a thick folder across the table. Because we have 6 months of communications between your client and Miss Chun discussing in detail how they plan to hide assets, frame Mrs. Lopez as mentally unstable, and divorce her while leaving her destitute. I'm happy to go through all of them if you'd like. The color was draining from Marcus's face again. He'd clearly thought his texts with Brittany were private, protected somehow. He'd underestimated what a good forensic accountant could recover. Mr. Lopez, Rebecca continued, let's talk about your company, Lopez Digital Solutions. What is the current financial state of that company? It's going through some challenges, but is it bankrupt? Marcus glanced at his lawyer, who nodded reluctantly. The company has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. And when did these financial problems begin? About 3 years ago, the market shifted. The market shifted? Or you began embezzling company funds to cover personal expenses? I never embezzled anything. Rebecca pulled out another folder. I'd seen this tactic before. She always kept the most damaging evidence until her target was already defensive. Mr. Lopez, according to your company's financial records, which we obtained through discovery, you paid yourself a salary of $1 million a year while the company was unable to make payroll for its regular employees. You used company credit cards for personal vacations, personal gifts, and personal expenses totaling over $2 million. That's textbook embezzlement. Marcus was sweating now. Those were legitimate business expenses. Was the diamond bracelet you purchased for Miss Chen a legitimate business expense? Was the vacation to Bali with Miss Chen a legitimate business expense? Was the penthouse apartment you rented in her name a legitimate business expense? Each question hit him like a hammer blow. His lawyer was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how badly this deposition was going. Let's move on to your personal finances, Rebecca said. Specifically, your relationship with my client's finances. Did you open any credit cards in Mrs. Lopez's name? We have joint credit cards. Did you open any credit cards in Mrs. Lopez's name without her knowledge or permission? The silence was answer enough. For the record, Rebecca said, Mr. Lopez opened 4 credit cards in my client's name without her knowledge, using her social security number and forging her signature on the applications. He then charged over $200,000 on these cards. This is identity theft, which is a federal crime. I was going to pay them off, Marcus said weakly. With what money? Your bankrupt company? Let's talk about that. You told my client you were wealthy enough to support both of them. You convinced her to trust you with the finances. But you've systematically stolen from her while lying about your own financial situation. Isn't that correct? Marcus looked at his lawyer desperately. Gerald cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a break. No, let's keep going, Rebecca said pleasantly. I'm just getting started. Mr. Lopez, were you aware that your wife had her own income during your marriage? Marcus looked confused. She didn't work. She stayed home. Are you certain about that? Of course I'm certain. She was home every day, cooking and cleaning and running a multi-million-dollar investment firm? The confusion on Marcus's face would have been funny if this whole situation weren't so tragic. What are you talking about? Rebecca slid another folder across the table, this one directly to Marcus. These are financial records for Caldwell Strategic Investments, a firm co-founded by your wife 8 years ago, the same time you thought she'd quit her job to stay home. The firm currently manages over $500 million in assets. Your wife's personal portfolio, built during your marriage using funds she earned herself, is worth $12 million. I watched Marcus open the folder and start reading. Watched his face go from confusion to disbelief to something like horror as he realized what he was seeing. This can't be real, he whispered. It's very real, Rebecca said. Your wife has been financially independent this entire time. While you were calling her stupid and helpless, she was building an empire. While you were planning to leave her destitute, she already had more money than you ever did. And the truly beautiful part? Because she earned this money during your marriage, and because California is a community property state, you might actually be entitled to half of it in the divorce. Marcus's expression shifted to something like hope. Except, Rebecca continued, her voice taking on an edge, you forfeited any claim to marital assets when you committed fraud and embezzlement. Your crimes against my client void your community property rights. So instead of getting half of her $12 million, you get nothing. Actually, less than nothing. You owe her $8 million in restitution. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Marcus slumped in his chair like a puppet with cut strings. Now, Rebecca said, gathering her papers, my client is willing to settle this matter without pursuing criminal charges, but only if you agree to the following terms within 48 hours. You will pay $8 million in restitution, $3 million in damages, and all legal fees. You will sign over any remaining marital assets. You will publicly retract all statements you've made about my client's mental state or competence. And you will agree to stay at least 500 feet away from her at all times. Do these terms seem reasonable to you? Marcus couldn't even speak. He just looked at his lawyer, who nodded slowly. We'll need time to consider. You have 48 hours, Rebecca repeated. After that, we file criminal charges, and this becomes much messier. Your choice. The deposition was over. As we packed up our materials, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. I'd won. Completely, totally, devastatingly won. Marcus's life was in ruins. His reputation destroyed, his finances obliterated. Everything he'd built on lies and manipulation had collapsed. But winning didn't erase the 10 years I'd spent married to someone who'd never really loved me. It didn't erase the betrayal or the casual cruelty or the smirk on his face when he told me I was nothing. Marcus signed the settlement agreement 36 hours later. He didn't have $8 million in cash, obviously, but he had assets that could be liquidated. His shares in the company, worthless as they were, went to me. His car, his watch collection, his designer furniture, all sold to pay his debt. He took out loans against his future earnings, essentially mortgaging the rest of his life to pay me back. The house stayed in my name, obviously, since it had always been mine. The joint accounts were divided, but since he'd emptied most of them, there wasn't much to divide. I kept everything I'd earned separately, all $12 million, completely protected from his claims. Within a month, Marcus's company formally declared bankruptcy. The board sued him personally, his investors sued him, and the IRS filed a lien against any assets he had left. He was forced to take a middle management position at one of his competitors, the same companies he'd spent years looking down on. Brittany, as expected, was long gone. Her social media showed her in Monaco, then Dubai, then Singapore, always with different wealthy men, always staying at the most expensive hotels. She'd moved on to her next target without a backward glance at the wreckage she'd left behind. 6 months after I filed for divorce, I stood in the boardroom of Caldwell Strategic Investments, looking out at the city skyline. Our firm had just closed the biggest deal in our history, a strategic investment that would net our clients and us over $100 million. Nice work, David said, coming to stand beside me. I always knew you were brilliant, but this deal was something special. Thanks. It feels good to be acknowledged for what I actually do, rather than what someone assumes about me. How are you doing? Really? I considered the question. 6 months ago, I'd been married to someone who'd treated me like property. Now I was free, wealthy, successful, and building the life I'd always wanted. I'm doing well, I said honestly. Better than well. I'm thriving. Good. You deserve it. Marcus was always an idiot for not seeing what he had. He saw what he wanted to see, a convenient fiction that made him feel powerful. He just forgot that fiction doesn't hold up under scrutiny. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since before my marriage. I went out with friends, real friends who knew about my career and celebrated my successes. We went to a rooftop bar downtown, ordered expensive cocktails, and toasted to new beginnings. I still can't believe you kept your whole career secret for 8 years, my friend Jennifer said. How did you manage it? Carefully, I replied. Very, very carefully. But it was worth it. The moment Marcus told me I'd come crawling back because I had nothing, that moment made every cautious decision worth it. What did his face look like when he found out you were actually wealthy? I smiled, remembering. Like someone had just told him the sky was actually green. Complete cognitive dissonance. He couldn't process information that contradicted his entire worldview. Men like that never can, Jennifer said. They tell themselves stories about how they're superior, how they're in control, and they never question whether those stories are true. It's not until reality hits them in the face that they realize they've been delusional. A year after the divorce was finalized, I was invited to speak at a women's business conference. The topic was financial independence and why it mattered. I'd never been comfortable with public speaking, but Rebecca convinced me that my story could help other women. "You did something remarkable," she said. "You protected yourself and your future while maintaining a marriage. You prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Other women need to hear that it's possible." So I accepted the invitation. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of women, I felt a responsibility to be honest about my experience. 10 years ago, I married someone I thought was my partner. I trusted him with our finances, our future, our life together. But I also remembered my mother's story. I remembered how she'd given up everything and been left with nothing. So I made a choice. I decided to trust, but verify. I talked about keeping my career, about maintaining separate finances, about documenting everything, about being prepared for a disaster I hoped would never come. And when that disaster did come, I continued. When my husband told me I was nothing without him, when he gave me a week before I'd come crawling back, I was ready. Not because I'd been planning to leave, but because I'd been planning to protect myself. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. The night my husband smirked and told me I'd be lost without him was the night I realized he'd never actually seen me. He'd seen the story he wanted to tell himself. The helpless wife who needed him. The dependent woman who gave him power. He'd been so busy congratulating himself for supporting me that he'd never asked if I actually needed supporting. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Financial independence isn't about planning to leave. It's about having the choice to leave if you need to. It's about making sure that if the worst happens, you can protect yourself and your children. It's about never being in a position where someone can tell you that you're nothing without them. The applause when I finished was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of women came up to tell me their own stories. Women who'd given up careers. Women who'd trusted the wrong people. Women who'd been left with nothing when marriages ended. But also women who'd been smart. Who'd maintained their own accounts, their own careers, their own identities. Women who'd learned from their mothers or sisters or friends' experiences and protected themselves. "Thank you," one woman said to me, tears in her eyes. "My husband has been pressuring me to quit my job. He says I don't need to work, that he makes enough for both of us. But something about it feels wrong, and I couldn't explain why. Now I understand. It's not about the money. It's about having my own foundation." "Exactly," I said. "It's about making sure you're choosing to be in your marriage, not trapped in it." 2 years after my divorce, I received an email that I almost deleted without reading. The sender was Marcus, and my first instinct was to block him. But curiosity won out. "Sarah," it read, "I know I have no right to contact you. I know I don't deserve any response. But I wanted you to know that I've spent the last 2 years in therapy, working through why I did what I did. My therapist says I need to make amends, to acknowledge the harm I caused." The email went on for several paragraphs. Marcus talking about his issues with control, his fear of inadequacy, his need to feel superior to mask his own insecurity. He talked about how his success had gone to his head, how he'd started to believe his own hype, how he'd treated people, especially me, as props in his story rather than human beings with their own value. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote. "I don't even think I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did. I spent 10 years married to an extraordinary woman and never saw her because I was too busy seeing my own reflection. I told myself you needed me because I needed to be needed. I convinced myself you were helpless because it made me feel powerful." He ended with, "You were right about everything. I gave you a week before you'd come crawling back. Instead, you gave me a lifetime to regret losing you. I'm sorry, Sarah. For all of it. I read the email 3 times. Part of me wanted to respond with anger, to list all the ways he'd hurt me and destroyed years of my life. Part of me wanted to be gracious, to accept his apology and move on. In the end, I did neither. I simply filed the email away and went back to my life. Marcus's apology was for him, not for me. I didn't need his acknowledgement to know my worth. I'd proven that to myself when I'd walked away from his cruelty and built something better. Today, 5 years after that night in the kitchen when Marcus smirked and told me I was nothing, I'm the CEO of Caldwell Strategic Investments. We've grown from a small firm managing $500 million to a major player managing over $3 billion in assets. I'm regularly featured in business magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and consulted by other firms about investment strategy. My personal net worth has grown to over $30 million. I own my home outright, drive the car I want, travel where I please, and support causes I believe in. I've started a foundation that helps women rebuild their lives after divorce, providing financial counseling and job placement services. I'm not married. I date occasionally, but I'm in no hurry to share my life with someone again. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who sees me for who I actually am rather than who they want me to be. But if I don't, I'm okay with that too. I'm complete on my own. Sometimes I think about that night, about Marcus's smirk, his certainty, his absolute confidence that I would fail without him. I think about how he gave me a week before I'd come crawling back. He was wrong about almost everything, but he was right about one thing. That night did change everything. It just didn't change it the way he expected. Because the truth is, I didn't need a week to survive without him. I'd been surviving, thriving actually, for years while he thought I was dependent on him. His cruelty didn't break me, freed me from pretending, from diminishing myself, from living in the shadow of someone else's ego. So yes, Marcus, you gave me a week, but I gave myself a lifetime of success, independence, and the absolute certainty that I am more than enough all on my own. I always was. I just had to stop believing your lies to see it. And that smirk on your face that night, that moment of absolute certainty that you had won, that moment was actually when you lost everything. You just didn't know it yet. But I did. I always did. Because while you were busy underestimating me, I was busy becoming someone you could never diminish again.